So I know it's kind of speaking to the choir right now, because if I ask the question, if you could speak to God, what would you say? And you kind of already know that you can pray. You already know you can speak to God, and I thought about asking that question, like, what would you say? And, we know hopefully how to pray, and you start by praising God. But if you had to ask God, like, one thing, typically when we talk to anybody, I'm going to include God as part of anybody, the first thing that when we want to talk to somebody usually is to register a complaint. It's never just, sometimes it's to say thank you, but we tend to go negative more than anything else. And sometimes, generally speaking, we say, well, if you could ask God one thing, you could maybe think about a tragedy that's happened in your life, something that's happened to hurt you, something that's going on in the world, and you say, why? Like, why did Adam and Eve have to eat from the tree? God, why did you put the tree there? Why did this person do that? Why did that? And so we ask God, we kind of want to register complaints. And that's what we're going to be kind of looking at today. So I just kind of want to register that in the back of your mind. Think about that. Like, what exactly is it you would want to ask God or talk to God about? And what do you think he might say to you in response? So just kind of put that in the back of your mind. So when we talk about Jonah, like I said earlier, we typically, our minds go to Jonah and the whale, or Jonah and the fish, more accurately. But I want to focus not just on the fish. We're going to actually talk about how he got there in the first place. What happened to actually get him there? And we're going to take a deep dive, and we're going to see the clues there actually in chapter 4, which happens after this whole event. So what happens, if you haven't been reading along, it's a pretty easy story to understand. You have Jonah, who is just a regular dude. We don't know really much about his background, other than the fact that God called him and said, I need you to go and preach. I need you to go and proclaim a word. Go give a word to the people of Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, a foreign country, a foreign land. And so I need you to go and preach there. And Jonah said, no, I'm not going to go. And while we don't necessarily see the word him saying no, he did it by walking away. The first thing he did was get onto a boat, and we saw to Tarshish, to get on a boat that would go completely the opposite direction of Nineveh. Nineveh is this way. Tarshish is this way, and he says, I don't want anything to do with it. And you can speculate why. Why would he do that? I think a lot of people, sometimes we go fear, like he's running from something. We say he's running from God. He's running from responsibility. He's running from something that God wants him to do, and he just doesn't want to do it, and so he goes. And so he gets on this boat, and now how does he land in the water? It's because God forms a storm around him, winds and waves, and it's this horrible storm around this boat where the sailing crew started to panic, and they're afraid. It's just starting to tear their ship up. They're afraid that they're all going to drown, and they're dumping cargo left and right. They're throwing everything off their boat to make it lighter so they can stay afloat. And the whole time that's happening, Jonah is sleeping. He's down below actually taking a nap through this whole thing. He wasn't concerned at all about what was happening. That kind of gives, let's kind of give a who Jonah is. Let's just say that. He was not concerned. He was asleep. And so the sailors are all getting excited, and they're nervous, and they say, everybody call on your God. Every God you have, whoever you worship, call on their God to save us. And so they're dumping everything. They're praying to God, whoever they're praying to. And then they do a game almost like a spin the bottle, where they say, okay, who's responsible for this? They threw lots for that, and it pointed towards Jonah. And Jonah finally got up, and they said, aren't you concerned? Don't you need to pray to your God? And Jonah finally goes, yeah, it's my fault. Just throw me over, and it's my fault. Just throw me over, and it'll be fine. And they didn't want to do this, because who wants to be responsible for killing a man? They don't want to do that. And so they start praying to a God, anybody. Said, Lord Almighty, we're doing this because we want to make sure it's very clear. He's volunteering for this. We don't want to do this, so have mercy on us. And then they throw him over the boat, throw him over the side, and everything's calm. And then in the middle of that, they realized Jonah was right, and they started praising God. But now Jonah's in the water. He's in the middle of the sea, and he's drowning. And now comes the great fish. It says God provided a great fish, swallowed him up. And while he's in the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, he figures it out, and he goes, okay, I'm sorry. He repents, meaning, you remember, repenting is like he was going away from God, and now I'm going to turn around and go back towards God. I repent. I called out to you. You saved me. Like, okay, I'm going to go do the job. And then this beautiful passage where it says, where it says the fish vomits him onto this dry land. I love that verse, just that word vomit. And you think about that, what kind of stink was on his body? You know, you've been to the seafood city or the fish markets, and you go, it just kind of has a smell to it, and he's dripping in it, in fish vomit. And he gets out, has to shake it off, and who knows how long it took to get that smell off. So I imagine then him going to Nineveh, people were like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. Okay, so yes, we'll do whatever you want to get the stink out of town. I don't know. But he goes back to Nineveh then. He goes and he preaches and he says, okay, in 40 days, because of your evil deeds, in 40 days, God's going to destroy this place. And instantaneously, pretty much, after 3 days of marching around the city turns. The city goes into mourning over the evil deeds. They relent and they repent of their sins, and God relents of calamity, and it's over. This beautiful, great success. So why was Jonah afraid? Was he afraid? Was he avoiding this? Was he afraid of success? What would happen to him? Not really. The reason why he was in the fish had nothing to do with fear, had nothing to do with self-doubt, had nothing to do with, I don't want to go over there for it's too long of a trip, or God, I don't believe you'll actually go do anything. He was in there because he is bitter. Because he just didn't want to do the job. Because he knew what God would do. He didn't want those people to be saved. So we're going to focus now on something that I think is more miraculous than the actual story of the fish. And something that maybe at times we take for granted. Jonah talks to God, and God talks back. You know, we're used to talking to God, but now we're going to see God talking back. And think about what a miracle that is, that the God the Father, Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, talks back. So what would you say to God? Whatever it is in your life. Something maybe you're bitter about, angry about. What do you think? And what do you think God would say to you? So in here, Jonah's not afraid. He's mad. It says he's angry. He goes, isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? So they've already had this conversation going, and I love it. Isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still at home? That is what I tried to forestall by fleeing Tarshish. I knew that you are gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. I knew that about you. I knew that you were going to do something good. I knew that you were going to save them, because when you go somewhere to do something, it happens. And I didn't want it to happen. So I didn't want to go. He didn't want them to be saved. He didn't want them to be saved. And he's angry about it. He's angry. When you think about the Assyrians, the people of Nineveh, if you know your ancient history, they were really like any conquering nation in the ancient world, even today. They were the bullies of the ancient world. And by a bully, I mean not just a conquering nation, because I think conquering usually happens once. You conquer a nation, they're defeated, you move on. A bully oppresses again and again and again and again. They're like the school bully who takes your lunch money, not just one day, but every day. The person who reminds you that you are powerless, that you're hopeless, that you can't do anything. Because the Assyrians wouldn't just go and take over a city. They'd go take over a city, but then they would leave the people there and say, okay, then you owe us. We're going to take a percentage of your crops. We're going to take a percentage of your money. It's going to be so bad, it's more than what you can actually afford and what you can do. We're going to make your life miserable, and we're going to do it on a scheduled basis every single day, every single week, every single month, according to the season. We're going to continue to take whatever you have. And if you decide to build anything in that time, we're going to come and knock it down. So Jonah is bitter. He doesn't want them to be saved. And God actually asked the question, what right do you have to be angry? And you can sit there and go, well, he has a right to be angry. You know, it points to the way. He says, now take away my life, Lord. I don't want to do this anymore. I would rather die than live like this. I don't want to do it anymore. I'd rather die. Then God says to him, actually, almost feels like the audacity. What right do you have to be angry? What right do you have to be angry? I think we can identify with that. It's a question that we want to tell God, I have every right to be angry. These people did this and they did that. And I don't want that to happen. I don't like that person. This person did this and this person did that. You know, I remember after 9/11, my dad, who, if you don't know, my dad was a pastor. It was a long other story, but he was a pastor in Oklahoma. And after 9/11, in church, my dad, as part of the prayers, actually started praying for Osama bin Laden to be saved. Started praying for that. And you can imagine the reaction, because that's the enemy. Our nation, we hunted him down. That was a big, big deal that we did. And it was a celebration when they finally got him. My dad actually started praying for him. And his congregation was a little, why are we doing that? We don't want that. We want to get him, not save him. And my dad's response to it was simply, what do you think is going to end all this faster? Us killing him or God saving him? What do you think? If God saves him, then everything stops. Kill him, then it just keeps on going. Then you got to kill the next guy, the next guy, and the next guy after that. Well, their response was, okay, so they kept praying for him. But we can get that kind of response to it. Like, why would we want to actually do that? But now, though, the anger, we had an anger as a people over all the bullies and the people who do bad things, and maybe even your own life. The bully's been saved, so Jonah's had it. But he says, I don't want to do this anymore. He says, I want to quit. I'd rather die. I don't want to go back to school. I don't want to go back to work. I don't want to go back to the relationship. I'd rather die. But then God says, what right do you have to be angry? Well, I have every right. But then something else happens. A miraculous thing happens again. Jonah went outside because he's sulking. Jonah goes outside the city, and he can just make sure he makes a little shelter and plumps down like this to watch the city, because he wants to watch the city burn. It's not going to happen, but he just wants to see what's going to happen. And he builds himself a little bit of shelter out there. It's sunny, it's hot out there. It's in the desert. It's in probably a desertous area. Hot wind is there. So he goes out to sit in the city, and there he made himself, it says, a shelter. He sat in its shade and waited to see what was going to happen. Then the Lord provided a leafy plant and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about that plant. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm which chewed the plant so that it withered. And when the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. And again, he wanted to die and said, it would be better for me to die than to live. Then God asked Jonah, well, what right do you have to be angry over this plant? And Jonah answered, I have every right to be angry, so angry that I want to die. It's like he's saying, nothing goes right for me. At some level, we can see, okay, you got the big bully of the Assyrians, you're mad about that, but then you start to see a little bit more of that. No, this guy's just bitter. He's angry over a plant. He's angry about the stuff that, God gave, and then God took away. That had nothing to do with him. He didn't earn it. He didn't build it. He enjoyed the gift that God gave him, and then it was gone. And it wasn't just being sad about the plant. I want to die. Nothing goes my way. He was bitter. And is starting to show that even in this situation outside of his control, that anger has taken root in his heart and has turned to bitterness, and it defines who he is as a bitter person. Nothing goes right for me. It's all about me. God, you gave it to me, and then you took it away. These people, that person, nothing goes right for me. I didn't get the class. I didn't get the injury. This person was taken from me. This person happened to me. This thing happened, and nothing goes right for me. It's all about what I think is fair for me. And bitterness is poison that makes you want to die instead of live. I heard a phrase that bitterness, like mold, grows best in the dark. When you just let it sit there. And references the dark place bitterness resides in your heart before it becomes full-blown outward resentment. And that's what we're seeing in Jonah. And this is where, though, I want to give Jonah some credit. Because even in his bitterness, he still talked to God. Even in his bitterness and his desire to die, he still talked to God. He may not have gotten the answer he liked, but he still talked to him. And we don't really even know the end of the story, because we don't know the end. We don't know how he responds to it. We like to have our stories just kind of tied up in a nice little bow that everything turned out okay, and we don't know. And a lot of times I think God leaves it like that for us in the Bible, to say we don't know. We just know here it is, and you can take it and go this way, or you can take it and go that way. And God shows him a path in this to get rid of the bitterness, to get rid of the death that is in his life. And he shows it for us, and he shows it in his love for us and for everyone. And that while things may not be going right in our eyes, there are other things going on that we have to consider. That your story isn't the only story. There are other things that are happening, because the Lord replied to him, says, the plant grew up overnight and it died overnight. You didn't plant it or make it grow. Yet you feel sorry for this plant. Woe is me. Woe is my plant. He goes, shouldn't I feel sorry for this important city, Nineveh? It has more than 120,000 people in it, as well as many animals. I like that little addition right there. As well as many animals, because I am concerned over the whole thing. And then he hints that there is something else going on that Jonah didn't really want to talk about, that didn't think about. And he says, and these people couldn't tell their right hand from their left. You know, when I talk to God, and this is an invitation for all of you. It's not just me, but everybody has an invitation to talk to God, and it's an invitation for you to do the same. And there are moments when I am frustrated with life. There are moments where you sit there and go, I wish I were dead. Like, I don't want to keep going in this situation. God, if you could just kill me now, take me to heaven, or just kill me now, I'd be fine with it. There are times when you get frustrated like this. And you think to yourself, God, how could you possibly understand? You're God. How could you ever know what it feels like to be oppressed? You're God. How could you ever know what it feels like to suffer? You're God. You're in charge. How could you ever know what that feels like? And then usually after I do rant like that a little bit, I get things off my chest, God actually speaks. And sometimes it's not necessarily like this conversation, but it's a conversation. And especially whenever I say, God, do you understand suffering? Do you understand this or that? It's like, oh yeah, you kind of do. And usually some kind of story in the Bible comes up where I see how God understands whatever situation it is, and they're all a variety of things, that God does have a certain amount of understanding, but also a pathway through it. And the Bible shows that he does understand. Just for this idea of being wronged, somebody's hurt you. Well, Jesus, yeah, I understand that. I understand that. My friends betrayed me. Whole crowd, everybody turned on me. People I never knew laid me flat on my back, nailed my hands to a cross. Was it fair? No. It's not fair. But what did I do? You know, while they're doing that, it said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. You know, think about that phrase that he told to Jonah. These people don't know their left hand from their right hand. They don't know what they're doing. They're working in a world that works so much different than a world that follows me. They're in that dog-eat-dog world. This is the world in which they live, the world in which they grew up. But guess what? I still love them. I still have compassion for them. So Jesus on the cross saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And then we know what God did through that. That he would save the world. There are so many things that we don't even think about are happening in our moments of hurt. So instead of holding on to bitterness, and it could be angry at God for not just asking for forgiveness and things and forgiving other people. Some people have hurt you, but things have happened in your life that have hurt you. That you can't really pinpoint a person. Some of you have all, look at a lot of people, you've mourning for people you've lost. There's just things that just happen. But instead of holding on to bitterness, which is ugly, and it's poison for the soul, and it leads to death. But when we go to God and we just dump it out, I'm mad. I told you that this would happen. I'm mad about it. Trusting that God knows that there's a bigger story. To trust that there are things happening that we don't know about. And yes, it hurts, but God does understand. And he is able to do something great out of it. In this moment, he saved 120,000 people. Jesus saved the world by dying and rising. But when we just let it out, God's grace is able to come in and flush the bitterness out. Now, in your prayers, if you do that, and one day you see a plant just kind of pop up out of nowhere, pay attention to that. All right? But don't be afraid to talk to God. Talking to him and him talking back is a miracle that you can experience today. Just let him out. Just let it out. And don't be afraid. And don't be afraid. So some processing questions over the week. If you haven't read Jonah, go and do it. It's only 4 chapters. But in the book of Jonah, like I said, there's a lot of points that we could get out of it, but we just focused on that today. So as you're reading the book of Jonah, as you've read it, think about, is there anything God that's maybe calling you to do, responsibility-wise, that you're avoiding? It may not be a mission to Nineveh, but it could be your calling as a father, a mother, a son, or a daughter, a church member, fill in the blank. Was God calling you to do something that you're avoiding? So think through that and then ask the question, why? And share that with God. And then second question is, God often sends turbulence in life to get us to change directions. Remember him on the boat. God will send turbulence in your life to get us to change directions. So the kind of question is like, well, what kind of turbulence are you experiencing today? And what is one action that you can take today, like getting thrown out of the boat? It may seem scary, but what's one action you can take today that you can move back into the other direction? Then even if you're scared, think through, if God's called you to something, has God ever miraculously or unexpectedly provided and protected you when you were hopeless? Think about Jonah in the water. And what did he do? Did he send a fish? Is there any reason for you to believe that he won't do it again? A lot of times when we think of our life, has God continue to send what we need? And then finally, and this is the question we talk about today, is there any bitterness in your life that you just have to let go of? Pray about it, and I would encourage you to even write it down and then write down what you feel God may be telling you. Think about, how does he understand? How did he respond to it? And then can you follow his example? Just get rid of it. Because when we get rid of the poison, get rid of the bitterness, God replaces it with life.